I get it, you've probably spent a few minutes scrolling through endless laptop specs, watching video reviews that sound more like a sales pitch than a real conversation, and now you're wondering if any of this actually matters for you. You don't want to drop a huge chunk of cash on something that looks gorgeous on paper but ends up gathering dust because it doesn't fit your workflow. And you're also worried about the classic laptop nightmare. Buying a machine that looks impressive until you try to run your day-to-day tasks and it just can't keep up. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. So let's cut through the hype and see whether the Dell 16 Premium, Dell's new next-gen XPS 16, aimed at power users, actually lives up to the promise of being a portable workstation that can also handle a bit of gaming on the side. First off, the biggest thing that separates this Dell from a typical business laptop is the 16.3-inch OLED screen. We're talking a 3840-2400 panel that supports 120Hz refresh and touches the whole surface. For anyone who spends hours in Photoshop, Premiere, or any design tool that leans on color accuracy, that kind of display can feel like a game changer. The contrast depth of an OLED panel means blacks are truly black, and the wide color gamut makes gradients look smoother. In practice, that translates to seeing your video edits with more fidelity and spotting issues that a standard LCD might hide. If you're a UI/UX designer or a photographer who needs to judge color straight from the screen, this is a tangible advantage. That said, OLED screens are also notorious for being power-hungry. In my own tests running a 4-hour work session with the screen set at 100% brightness and a couple of video renders in the background, the battery dipped below 20% before I even finished a typical morning of meetings and code pushes. If you're the type of person who needs to be unplugged for a full day of travel, the 16 Premium might force you to keep a charger on your lap more often than you'd like. For a lot of remote workers, that trade-off is acceptable because the visual quality outweighs the need for marathon battery life, but it's a real consideration. Now let's talk performance. Under the hood sits Intel's Ultra 9285H, a 16-core chip that's positioned between the ultra-efficient and the ultra-high-end parts of Intel's lineup. In day-to-day use, opening dozens of browser tabs, compiling code, running VMS, the CPU feels snappy. I tried building a large solution in Visual Studio while simultaneously running a Docker container and a few background Photoshop scripts. The machine didn't stutter, and the temperature stayed under control for the first hour. The RTX 5060 with 8 GB of VRAM is another solid piece of the puzzle. It's not a top-tier gaming GPU, but it's more than capable of handling 1080p titles at medium settings and can accelerate GPU-based render tasks in Blender or DaVinci Resolve. For a professional who occasionally wants to unwind with a game after a long day of debugging, this feels like a nice surprise rather than a forced compromise. The real-world impact of that GPU becomes clear when you hook the laptop up to an external 4K monitor via one of the 3 Thunderbolt 4 ports. The bandwidth is enough to drive a 4K display at 60 Hz while still feeding the internal screen, which means you can have a dual-screen workstation without needing a docking station. The extra Thunderbolt ports also give you flexibility to connect fast external SSDs or an Ethernet adapter if your office network demands a wired connection. That kind of connectivity is where Dell seems to have listened to power users. You can essentially turn this laptop into a desktop replacement for a few hours a day. On the downside, the Dell 16 Premium isn't as upgrade-friendly as a desktop tower, and that's typical for premium ultrabooks. The SSD is soldered, so if you ever need more than the 1 TB that ships with the machine, you'll have to rely on external storage, something that can be a hassle if you're moving massive video files around daily. Also, the RAM is not user-replaceable. You get 32 GB of DDR5 straight out of the box, which is generous for most tasks. But if you ever need more, you're stuck with what's already there. Weight is another practical point. At roughly 2.2 kilograms, about 4.9 pounds, the laptop is definitely portable, but it's not the featherlight 13-inch competitor you might see on a coffee shop table. If you're commuting by train and plan to carry it around all day, the extra heft combined with the larger footprint can become noticeable. For many power users, the trade-off bigger screen, better GPU, more ports justifies the added bulk. But if you're looking for a laptop you can barely feel in a backpack, you might want to look elsewhere. Pricing is where the rubber meets the road. Dell positions this as a premium device, and the sticker price reflects that. You're paying for the OLED panel, the high-end CPU, the RTX 5060, and the professional-grade Windows 11.